Online retailer Superbalist has apologised to its staff after telling them it had no stance on the Black Lives Matter movement. The human rights movement has been part of protests in the United States and other parts of the world since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the end of May. The unarmed black man, you will remember, died after a white police officer knelt on his neck for close to 9 minutes, despite Floyd's cry that he could not breathe. Superbalist has since tweeted that its earlier response about having no stance on the issue meant that it does not, as a company, comment on issues outside of its business, and that this always has been its policy. But how important is it for brands to take a position on issues such as abuse, injustice, and indeed racism? For more on this, we're joined by political analyst Tessa Dooms by Skype from Johannesburg. Tessa, a very good afternoon to you. Always good to have you on. So how could Superbalist have misread the room so badly?
Well, it's not very surprising because often corporate companies are held to standards above the political fray, even though at an ethical, a moral, and a constitutional basis, they have to incorporate into the society that they are servicing, that they are part of. They are not just entities that float above society. They are corporate citizens. They are legally bound by the Constitution, which is the social compact of a country. And so in our country, where we have a history of race relations that is very bad and is negatively impacting on people, and we have a constitution that outrightly is anti-racist, it's important that companies are able to speak to their politics and their ethics and their ethos and how they view and deal with constitutional issues like racism.
And on that then, Tessa, when a company like Superbalist says, look, refusing to take a position initially on Black Lives Matter is nothing untoward. The company's policy has always been that it does not take a position on anything that arises outside of its running and business imperatives. Can we take that then and say, as a whole, corporates do not take a position on issues such as police brutality, racism, misogyny, the abuse of women, for example, precisely because that, to a degree, could hurt the bottom line, profits?
So no, we can't, because also not having a stand on these things should have companies be held to a standard that says, if we don't know where you stand, you could easily be standing on the wrong side of this issue, both as individuals who are the standing shareholders and directors of those companies, because companies, of course, are led by individuals, but also in terms of the company and what it's willing to support, where it's willing to put its money, and what it's willing to make its money off. If we, for instance, knew that a company was willing to make its money off child labor or off the sexual abuse of people, would we say that it's okay for that company to continue without any accountability? I don't think so. But there's also a historical context here, where we saw during apartheid how companies abroad, companies in other parts of the world, decided they were not going to do business with our country and our government, and they were going to take a stand against the injustices we were facing here. And so much more as a country, as corporate citizens of this country, to then turn a blind eye to say, well, it's in the US, well, it's not part of our core business values or our core business that we do. That says to me that you may be unscrupulous in other ways, and I don't want to be giving my money to you unless I know where you stand and where your money goes and what you're willing to make your money on.
And interesting, because in that statement then, now offering the apology, Superbalist saying it was tone deaf in its response. I want to read part of that statement. It says, as a group, our employees are today 85% black. We are, however, far from perfect in this regard and have much work to do on the various management levels, something we have committed to already doing. And one would say that part of that tone deaf reaction could be linked then to the fact that companies themselves are often untransformed.
Absolutely. Superbalist's response there is the equivalent of my best friends are black for a company. And to say that you're 85% black employees in a country like South Africa, where the majority of the country is made up of black citizens, that shouldn't be something that's applauded. That should be standard. We shouldn't even be raising an eyebrow to that. But that same company needs to be able to show us that it takes transformation seriously, right up in its ranks and in terms of its shareholders and share structures, that it's willing to look in the way in which its economic
All right, Tessa, we're struggling somewhat with your Skype. I'm not sure if we're able to persevere just a while longer with a conversation with Tessa. Do you still have Tessa? All right, Tessa, I'm told we have you back now. I want to ask you something else that has come up as a trend. When brands do speak out, there's sometimes a leaning towards wanting to leverage on the moment for some sort of publicity. How do we sift that out when brands do indeed speak?
I think that brands need to go beyond saying we are against something or we are for something by showing practical ways in which it engages with systemic issues. Racism is a systemic issue. Gender discrimination is a systemic issue. Violence is a systemic issue. And so the way you do business, who you do business with, your share structures, what you're willing to make your money on, and do you account for those things in the way you have your business model set up so that we can see that you are part of the redress project in the world. You can take practical steps as a brand rather than just pay lip service to something. It's just not enough to do a PR campaign if you are not fundamentally willing to look at where your money comes from, where it goes, and what sacrifices you're willing to make so that your money contributes positively to social change in the country that you're operating in.
Last question, how effective have boycotts of brands that refuse to move in the right direction been?
You know, I think that boycotts have proven over time to be very effective tools. And the buying power that companies depend on needs to be linked to some level of ethics and responsibility. And we need to ask more of brands than just a product that they give us. We need to know what that product is based on. And so I think boycotts can be incredibly effective, but they need to be based on principle rather than just on rhetoric. But more importantly, I think what we've also missed is that those employees of that company who asked for that deserve to work in a company where they know what the ethics are. And they shouldn't have to be subjected to working with a company who either refuses to take a stance or takes a negative stance just so that they can feed themselves. We have to be able to have ethical jobs and not just jobs so that we can stay alive.